So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Yudaversky of Brandeis University. It's been my pleasure to organize with my wonderful colleague Hanoch this day that we're spending together. After this morning's discussion on climate change, now we are talking about some of the challenges of artificial intelligence. I will read just one book that's helped me make sense of this, some of these issues. I've read into them. Nick Bostrom's Superintelligence. Before the prospect of an intelligence explosion, we humans are like small children playing with a bomb. Such is the mismatch between the power of our plaything and the immaturity of our conduct. Superintelligence is a challenge for which we are not ready now and will not be ready for a long time. We have little idea when the detonation will occur, though if we hold the device to our ear, we can hear a faint ticking sound. So, I guess what we're trying to do here this afternoon is, as we all need to do, try to attune ourselves better to the ticking, try to understand what it means to live in a world, say, where Amazon seems to know my deepest desires better than I do, how to live in a world defined by increasingly what Shoshana Zuboff powerfully calls surveillance capitalism, in which that which George Orwell imagined could be gotten by human beings only by a massive totalitarian enterprise of torture and coercion is given away for free by every one of us, including yours truly, every time I happily click on a terms of service app. And so to that end, we've gathered, as we did in the previous session, scholars, practitioners, and scholar practitioners to help us start thinking through. So what we're going to do is that each will sort of, because we have some time here, we have about 2 hours, we have 4 presenters, and we'd like to sort of give each one between, like around half an hour, roughly half an hour of time for their presentation and for an initial round of questions. And if we have more time for questions and conversation at the end, that'll be great. So our first presenter is Dr. Hava Tirosh Samuelson. I think fair to say one of the more distinguished scholars of Jewish thought and philosophy in our time. She's Director of Jewish Studies in the Irving and Miriam Low Professor of Modern Judaism and Professor of History at Arizona State University. She writes on Jewish intellectual history, on philosophy and mysticism and pre-modern Judaism, interaction between Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and the Middle Ages, feminist philosophy, Judaism and ecology, bioethics, and religion and science. And one of the things that's striking about her work is she brings her deep classical knowledge to bear on the contemporary issues about which she writes. In addition to numerous articles, book chapters, and reviews, she's the author of The Life and Thought of Rabbi Judah Messer-Yon, of the remarkable work Happiness in Pre-Modern Judaism, Virtue, Knowledge, and Well-Being. She's edited Judaism and Ecology, Created World and Revealed World, Women and Gender in Jewish Philosophy, The Legacy of Hans Jonas, about whom we heard a little bit more earlier today, Judaism and the Phenomenon of Life. Her most recent book is Religion and Environment, Judaism and Environment. She's written extensively on transhumanism, and also I've always admired her courage in being able to tackle that subject. And she's edited Building Better Humans, Refocusing the Debate on Transhumanism, and Perfecting Human Futures, Transhuman Visions and Technological Imagination. She is also the editor of the Library of Contemporary Jewish Philosophers, a very important multi-volume series. And so, Professor Tirosh Samuelson, if you would.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everybody. It's wonderful to see you all. And thank you, Hanoch and Yehuda, for putting together this session to reflect on the question of what does Jewish thought have to say about the future of humanity. And I'm going to start by looking at the present first. So today, AI technology governs almost all aspects of our life. Transportation and travel, communication and information, medicine and healthcare, security and warfare, science and technology, finance and banking, manufacturing and labor, agriculture and food production, criminal law and policing, government and law, art and culture, and finally, if that's not enough, entertainment and leisure. Given the ubiquity of AI, the paramount question is not whether we want to live with AI technology, but rather how can we live with AI technology in a manner that is consistent with our social, political, ethical, and spiritual understanding of being human. As at least two panelists know, I've been writing quite a lot about transhumanism. This is a futuristic ideology that envisions the emergence of a new phase in the evolution of the human species, in which biological humans will be replaced by super intelligent machines. That's the book by Nick Bostrom that was shown to you by Yehuda. I argue that Jewish philosophers should take transhumanism seriously and critically engage its veneration of AI technology. I suggest three intersection points between Jewish philosophy, transhumanism, and the AI technology it venerates. One is transcendence, two, responsibility, and three, embodiment. I will refer to Jonathan Sachs, or Rabbi and Lord Jonathan Sachs, to Emmanuel Levinas, and to Hans Jonas, whose name was already mentioned here in the morning, as Jewish thinkers whose ideas can help us articulate a Judaic critique of AI technology. Of course, other thinkers, Jewish thinkers, past and present, could have been mentioned as well, including Maimonides, Hermann Cohen, Eddie Gordon, Martin Buber, Franz Rosenzweig, Avraham Joshua Heschel, Joseph Soloveitchik, and David Hartman. This short talk is no more than an invitation for scholars of Jewish philosophy to pay more attention to transhumanism, to philosophy of technology, and to ethics of AI technology. Part 1, Transcendence and Freedom. Let me begin by saying a few words about transhumanism. Actually, as I'm using the words, are you familiar with transhumanism? Who is familiar? So not too bad, about a third or so. So transhumanism is an ideology that gives coherence to a wide range of converging technologies: genomics, robotics, informatics, nanotechnology, and artificial intelligence. As a utopian narrative about the power of technology, transhumanism articulates a social imaginary about the future of the human species. In the transhumanist narrative, converging technologies will bring about the psychological, perceptive, and cognitive enhancement of human beings that will pave the way for the replacement of biological humans by autonomous, superintelligent, decision-making machines, which will constitute the post-human age. So transhumanism leads to post-humanism, in case that's not clear. Since humans are going to build the so-called digital minds, that's a term that Nick Bostrom actually coined, that will eventually make humans obsolete. By promoting AI technology, transhumanism in essence proposes that humanity will bring about its own demise. I consider it collective suicide. So that's what transhumanism is ultimately about, even though they're not going to tell you if you talk to them. The concept of transcendence is the first intersection point between Jewish philosophy, transhumanism, and AI technology. Why? Because transhumanism technologizes transcendence. Or put differently, transhumanism claims that human-made technology, and particularly AI technology, can deliver transcendence, which human beings have aspired to attain for millennia. How so? In transhumanist ideology, transcendence is understood on two axes, the horizontal and the vertical. By horizontal, I refer to a slew of biotechnological interventions that enable humans to enhance themselves through genetic engineering, designer genes, or designer drugs, so as to make human beings, and I'm quoting from a transhumanist text, healthier, more beautiful, more athletic, more intelligent, more creative, more pleasant, and more other mores. So it's all about, transhumanism is about being more or doing more. Since transhumanists understand being more or doing better as pertaining to the functioning and the performance of the human body, and since they privilege choice over chance, transhumanists also promote what they call morphological freedom, namely the ability to choose a body we wish to have regardless of birth facts. Philosophically, morphological freedom is legitimated by the appeal to hedonistic imperative. You can read David Pearce on that. If you just Google David Pearce, you'll find that manifesto. And politically, morphological freedom is promoted as an individual civic right. Indeed, if we are to live by the hedonistic imperative, and if biology only causes misery and suffering, why not liberate humans from constraining biology? For transhumanists, biology is not destiny, as numerous technological innovations, especially those related to sexuality and gender, amply demonstrate. And if you do not wish to go as far as changing your biological body, all you need is to live, quote unquote, on various virtual platforms, where your simulated avatar can interact with other avatars in the what I would call as-if environment of cyberspace. In cyberspace, life is simulated without embodiment, since the physical body is precisely what transhumanism seeks to transcend and eventually obliterate. Well, if transcendence means going beyond the limits of biology, what about death? Aren't human beings organic entities with a limited lifespan that are destined to die as all organisms do? If you ask transhumanists, the answer is not really. Biotechnology, they predict, will enable us to overcome not only the limitations of aging, but perpetually defer death. Aubrey de Grey, I don't know if you know that name, very important contributor to that, is one of those people who call for crusade on death, crusade on aging and on death. And he proposes what he called radical life extension. There's a lot of literature on radical life extension. Basically, it's a range of technologies or biomedical therapies with ultimate purpose of postponing age-related effects. In truth, even he admits that we do die. But the question is, how can we postpone death as much as possible? And if you think that that's nonsense, well, many of those transhumanists actually believe in something called cryonics. And the center of cryonics is in Scottsdale, Arizona, where I live. So they endorse cryonics as a technology that will bring it about. Basically, it's freezing human bodies, and eventually that human body will be resuscitated when we have the technology. So right now, it's kind of suspended animation until that will happen. So you can say this is all kind of weird. But I have to tell you, it's not weird at all, because a lot of people, very famous people, promote that kind of approach to human life. And as far as biotechnology, I won't say much about it, but as far as biotechnology is concerned, many or a few Jewish ethicists have also joined the very pro-technology approach. I generally take a much more critical, skeptical approach toward biotechnology. So I'm going to, because of interest of time, I'm going to skip a little bit, but I would suggest that you read a little bit about cyborgization and how cyborgization is very much part of the story of how we can shift, not just going horizontally, but also going vertically, becoming a totally different human being, primarily through the development of AI. And the vision is ultimately is to create what is called artificial general intelligence, which is human-level intelligence that can combine insights from different topic areas and display flexibility and common sense reasoning. So the idea is we will create machines that are as intelligent as humans, and those machines basically are going to be the new species that will replace the biological human. So that's the vision. Whether it's feasible or not feasible, that's a big technology. Now let's go to the critique. So where do we start with a critique? I will start with a question of freedom. Is there freedom in AI technology? Currently, at least, it does not seem to be the case, since algorithms can only function as they were programmed by human designers. AI systems are artifacts devoid of freedom. And I, for one, am deeply concerned about the increasing power that they do exert over our life, while we, biological humans, increasingly lose our freedoms. All over the world, in authoritarian regimes and in weak or failing democracies, I have to say United States in one of those, we witness how AI technology is used to curtail or eliminate freedom of thought, freedom of expression, and freedom of assembly, as surveillance methods become more sophisticated and more intrusive. So transhumanists do acknowledge the risk of AI, but they basically believe that it's not so severe and we can overcome those risks. Again, because of concern for time, I want to skip. But if you only want to read one who speaks about those issues, I'm sure all of you read Yuval Noah Harari's books. Yuval Noah Harari is a big celebrity all over the world. And in many ways, I wouldn't call him a transhumanist, but he speaks very favorably about, at least he helps us to see what it's about, and what it's about for him is the creation of what he calls Dataism, in which humans worship data and trust algorithms to make the moral decisions. AI, Harari predicts, will follow its own path, going where no human has gone before and where no humans follows. Indeed, in the futuristic world of Dataism, death will have no dominion, to quote Dylan Thomas, because humans will become obsolete. So how can we engage all this from the perspective of Jewish philosophy? A good place to start is to reflect on the meaning of transcendence in transhumanist narratives. For transhumanists, transcendence is understood in materialistic terms. The enhancement of the human body so it could transcend biological limitations or eventually abolish the biological body entirely by turning material existence into data. So that fits what Harari calls Dataism. For transhumanists, this understanding of transcendence is rooted in a strictly material understanding of the theory of evolution. Natural evolution is too slow, too chaotic, too unpredictable to be left alone. Instead, transhumanists encourage deliberate human intervention to accomplish the telos of human life technologically by engineering the human species, leaving no room for chance or randomness. But is this the only way to think about transcendence? Obviously not. In Judaism, transcendence belongs to God. True transcendence belongs to God, precisely because God is the creator of the world. The doctrine of creation, rather than the theory of evolution, is the point of departure for Jewish philosophy and the religious worldview within which it operates. Rabbi and Lord Jonathan Sacks is among the few contemporary thinkers who have engaged the challenges of technology, especially AI technology that we experience daily on social media. Sacks commented on the fast pace of technological change that creates a cultural lag. I quote, creates a cultural lag, a state like now in which material culture, such as technology, is being transformed faster than non-material culture, such as models of governance and social norms. Rabbi Sacks insightfully viewed the Judaic worldview as a corrective response to the corrosive impact of AI technology on human life. His critique of technological society begins with the doctrine of creation. The creator God is radically transcendent to the world of nature that God had created. In the act of creation lies true freedom, the freedom of God from nature and the freedom of the human, who is created in the image of God from material necessity. Genuine freedom is not to be found in the liberation from material limitations, but in the joy of participating in the spiritual life that cannot be reduced to material conditions. Although material life in the here and now itself supports and gives rise to spiritual joy. This is the joyous freedom of covenantal life, which Sacks, following, I believe, Soloveitchik, has explicated in his numerous books. Here is one quote, because he writes so beautifully. I'm going to read you one quote from his book, The Home We Built Together, Recreating Society. So he's commenting on Exodus 19, verses 3 to 8, and he's saying the following. God made space for human freedom and invites an entire people to become, in the rabbinic phrase, his partners in the work of creation. The free God desires the free worship of free human beings. God transcends nature. Therefore, God is not bound by nature. Therefore, God is free. God sets his image on the human person. Therefore, humanity is free. The story of the Bible is the tangled tale of the consequence of God's faithful gift of human freedom. Faith, or more precisely, faithfulness, is born where the freedom of human beings meets the freedom of God in an unconstrained act of mutual commitment. So that's Rabbi Sacks for you. Wonderful orator he was. To reiterate his position, only God is truly free and only God creates humans who can participate in the divine freedom precisely because they are created in the image of God. So I would say if Sachs was still with us, he would definitely oppose transhumanism. Rabbi Sachs' concise articulation of transcendence and freedom allows us to reflect on our current world that is saturated by AI technology. Note that AI technology is promoted by the appeal to freedom, because AI presumably liberates us from all sorts of constraints. AI systems are supposed to enlarge the scope of human freedom by replacing workers from tedious labor, by shortening the decision-making processes through fast data analysis, or by translating bodily functions into medically relevant information that leads to better health outcomes. Mostly AI technology promises greater freedom concerning the one resource that humans need most, time. In its split-second calculations, AI technology can handle problems that earlier would have taken months, if not years, to reach a reasonable conclusion or decision. But does freedom lie merely in calculation? Can AI systems make decisions that negate or disrupt the way it was designed? It's a question for you, Moise. I maintain that Rabbi Sachs, and probably other people like me who endorse his approach, would have answered this question in the negative. As human-made artifacts, AI systems reflect human values, decision-making, and actions. Rabbi Sachs could have agreed with Deborah Johnson, the ethicist of AI, who asserted that AI systems can be viewed as moral, but not as moral agents. While the interactions of AI systems with humans raise many moral considerations, AI systems themselves lack moral agency. They also lack the freedom that characterizes moral agents who enjoy the freedom to err. That's a big thing, I believe, the freedom to err, and who are accountable for their choices. In the created world occupied by humans, freedom entails responsibility. That is, the ability to respond to the needs of the other who is different from me. This is the second intersection point between Jewish philosophy and transhumanism and AI technology. Modern Jewish philosophers, especially Martin Buber, Hasionos, and Emmanuel Levinas, had much to say about responsibility and its relationship to transcendence and freedom. In the following section, part 2, I discuss how Levinas was appropriated by AI ethicists while expressing qualms about that appropriation. Part 2. Responsibility and the dignity of the human. Let me go now to the second point of my critique that concerns responsibility and human dignity. For transhumanists, the future is dictated by the accelerated march of technological progress that will lead to the abolition of the human species. That may or may not happen in the remote future, but in the present, we do have to live with AI systems. To be clear, all automation technologies enable us to delegate to machines what was once done by humans. But AI technology does more than that. AI enables us to delegate far more because we can delegate responsibility itself. If AI systems are moral agents, as some machine ethicists hold, should they be considered legally and morally responsible? Who is responsible for the harms and benefits of the technology when agency and decisions are delegated to AI? We are responsible when we know what we are doing and know what the consequences will be. But AI systems can cause a lot of harm without knowing what they're doing because they lack consciousness, at least for now. Nick Bostrom, of course, argues that they will have consciousness. That's a big question. We can debate that. Right now, they don't have consciousness. Following Deborah Johnson, Mark Kokelberg also states, quote, machines can be agents but not moral agents because they lack not only consciousness but also free will, emotions, and capacity to form intentions and the like. If machines and algorithms are responsible, however you want to pronounce it, where does responsibility lies? Is it with the innovator of the technology, the owner of the technology, the user of the technology, the one who benefits from the technology, the one who regulates the technology, or all of the above? This is the genuine conundrum that has begun to be explored by Jewish ethicists, including the two panelists. So Moise and Nadav both have written on that, and I assume we will hear more from them. The problem is that the word responsibility, or responsibility as a concept, is very fuzzy, with numerous meanings, conditions, and applications. The fuzziness plagues the debates about autonomous cars, autonomous weapon systems, and algorithm-driven financial systems. In these cases, it is difficult to assign responsibility because they consist of many interconnected components. The algorithm, the sensors, all kinds of data that interact with all kinds of hardware and software. All of these are connected to the people who programmed and produced them, so it is hard to delimit the scope of AI. So I'm just putting it as a question. Because this is still an open question, what kind of an intelligence AI has, I suggest that the phrase artificial intelligence is a misnomer, at least for now. It's a category mistake, since they are not intelligent as humans are. If so, responsibility must lie with the human who programs the machines and designs the algorithm. But that claim is complicated since the human program doesn't really know what the AI is doing at any moment in time and cannot always explain what it did or how it came to a particular decision. This is the problem of transparency, which has become more evident in machine learning and deep learning that uses neural networks where explanation based on decision-making tree is no longer possible. So since humans, including the designers of AI, do not know what AI is doing, they cannot explain a particular decision. Therefore, it is difficult to talk about transparency or trust. Ethicists of AI have wrestled with the problem of responsibility, and on this issue, Jewish philosophers do have much to say. I'm most intrigued by the impact of Levinas's philosophy on the discourse of machine-human interface. This conversation is carried out by non-Jewish philosophers and ethicists for whom Levinas was the existentialist phenomenologist critical of traditional Western moral philosophy, whose insights open new vistas for ethics of AI. So why is Levinas so attractive to non-Jewish philosophers of AI technology? The work of David J. Gunkel, is a good place to start looking for an answer. He reminds us that ethics is customarily understood as being concerned with the question of responsibility for and in the face of an other. For traditional forms of moral philosophy, this other is more often than not conceived as another human being, another human subject, who is essentially and necessarily like we assume ourselves to be. That's end of quote from Gunkel. By reserving moral consideration to humans only, traditional moral philosophy excluded animals from its preview. And even among humans, it tended to treat certain classes as morally inferior. For example, women, African Americans, Jews, indigenous people, and so forth. Traditional moral philosophy justified the exclusion by appeal to certain abstract principles that highlighted sameness. Only those who presumably possessed a certain criterion were included in the community of moral agents. Gunkel explains that Levinas challenged the traditional assumptions of moral philosophy when he argued that, quote, ethics does not rely on metaphysical generalizations, abstract formulas, or simple pieties. His philosophy is concerned with a response to and responsibility for the absolutely other who is confronted in an irreducible face-to-face encounter, end of quote. Although Gunkel admits that for Levinas, this other is always and unapologetically human, Levinas allows us, according to him, to think otherwise and expand the scope of the other by becoming more inclusive than he himself was. This logic of Levinasian philosophy of alterity thus facilitates the inclusion of the non-human others, be they animals, ecosystems, or nature more broadly. And most relevant to us in this session, to the inanimate and the artificial. Now, Levinas' respect toward the radical otherness enables ethicists to extend the moral considerability to non-human animate and inanimate, including AI systems, thereby radicalizing Levinas. That's the title of a book that was edited by Peter Etterton. But is such interpretation of Levinas doing justice to Levinas and to his teachings? According to Levinas, God can be accessed only through one's responsibility for the other, but the other I believe, and maybe Hanoch would like to correct me, the other is decidedly human. The other cannot be contained or thematized. The other is infinite, only pointing in the direction of the transcendent God who cannot be known, but who is revealed through our responsibility for the other. The ethical life thus consists in responding to the moral call of the other. But let me reiterate, the other is decidedly human, whose embodied human needs obligate the self to respond. So for Levinas, we have no direct relationship with the divine. The divine can only be accessed through the human other, to whom the self is infinitely responsible. The face is thus a metaphor of the embodied human, and face-to-face encounter is distinctly human. Even Gunkel, in a later article published in 2021, says that technological devices do not possess a face or confront the human in a face-to-face encounter that would call for and would be called ethics. For that reason, Gunkel rephrases the merit of Levinas for the ethics of AI by saying that it lies not simply in inclusive moral theory, but, quote, in questioning the entire history of ethics and its necessary and unavoidable exclusions, end quote. Likewise, Peter Atherton, the person who extended the figure of the face to animals, concedes, quote, Levinas, despite his self-professed departure from the philosophical tradition, retains the great twin leitmotifs of the tradition: Anthropocentrism and Humanism. Now, whereas admirers of Levinas consider Anthropocentrism and Humanism as a failure of Levinas or shortcoming of Levinas, I consider the religious and specifically the Judaic, I consider that the specifically religious and specifically Judaic core rooted in the doctrine of creation. We do know that Levinas did not like to be known as a Jewish philosopher. But we also know that Levinas's Jewishness is culturally and conceptually integral to his philosophy. As Hanoch Ben Pazi and others have made clear, Levinas's philosophic and religious writings offer a coherent whole, not a bifurcated message that divorces philosophy from religion. The humaneness of the other, which Levinas considered as a pointing to God, is precisely what AI systems erase when embodied humans become data. Digital and AI technologies do erase our personal identity, disregard our privacy, dismiss our inherent dignity, because if we want to use Levinas's language, they deface us. To put this in Rabbi Sachs' language, when AI systems turn us into data which can be harvested, manipulated, and sold to the highest bidder, they remove our dignity of difference, our particularity that cannot be severed from our physicality. This can be best evident in the technology of facial recognition that some AI ethicists have endorsed. David Zvi Kalman correctly challenged the application of Levinas's philosophy to face recognition technology when he stated, quote, that Levinas would have banned facial recognition technology, and we should too. While expanding moral considerability is an honorable goal, I do not think it justifies glossing over, ignoring or dismissing Levinas's own humane teachings, which posit Levinas, very much like Rabbi Sachs, as a critic of our technologically saturated society rather than its endorser. Part 3, Embodiment and the Future of Humanity. No Jewish thinker was more prescient about the power of modern technology than Hans Jonas, who articulated the imperative of responsibility as a response to the trauma of World War II. In the third and last section of this presentation, I want to focus on Jonas, who focused on embodied human existence and our responsibility toward future generations of humanity. Jonas is especially relevant because he understood the threat of both technology and the ecological crisis to the future of humanity. Like Levinas, Jonas too did not like to be known as a Jewish philosopher. But his philosophy, and especially his critique of modern technology, could not be severed from his own experience as a German Jew, a Zionist, and a soldier in the Jewish brigade of the British Army during World War II. Jonas correctly grasped the modern technology is more than a mere instrument for human purposes. Modern technology forces human beings into a dialectical situation. Our attempt to bring the external world under our power ends with the power of technology to destroy or radically refashion the very subject whose power it is. I'm going to skip some of the quotations because of time consideration, but believe me, the justification is there. Jonas also correctly grasped the power of modern technology to set in motion a causal chain that has profound effect on objects and people in very remote places and in future epochs, and understood that these changes are irreversible. If mistakes are made, correcting them is very difficult, in many cases impossible. Therefore, I guess that's a point that Laurie already made in the previous conversation. Therefore, modern technology, especially biotechnology and AI technology, have changed the moral situation and undermined the entire pre-modern framework of human action. Jonas's task was to articulate the new ethics of our technological age that could take a new situation into consideration. Jonas insightfully critiqued the utopian spirit of modern technology and its glorification of progress that animate transhumanism. This utopian impulse is behind the promise of technology to cure the mistakes of nature or overcome its shortcomings, which constitute what I describe as the horizontal axis of transhumanist pursuit of transcendence. But most presciently, Jonas understood how modern technology turned the human being into an object of technology, into a design object, as exemplified most distinctly in genetic engineering and in cyborgization. These technology illustrate the Homo faber, the man the maker, who is now, I'm now quoting from Jonas, who is now turning on himself and gets ready to make over the maker of all the rest. Jonas, therefore, argued vociferously that the very existence of humanity as created by God is itself a value. Genetic engineering, a human-made technology, enables humans to create other humans, not in the image of God, but in their own image. This is the hubris against which Jonas spoke with prophetic passion, although unlike the biblical prophets and more like Levinas, Jonas insisted on the hiddenness of God and on God's inability to prevent human self-destruction. I'm going to go to the conclusion because I'm sure that some people are anxious here, right, Yehuda? Or are you giving me 2 more minutes? How are you feeling?
So that we can have time for questions.
So let me go to the, so we can talk more about Jonas, and I think that especially connecting it with what Bar Gur said earlier in the day. So let me go to the conclusion. Jonas' reflection have inspired my critique of transhumanism as well as my commitment to environmentalism. And Jonas has been a major inspiration for many others, among them Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. Like Jonas and Levinas, Sacks highlights the ethics of responsibility, its relationship to human freedom, which is rooted in creation in the image of God. In The Great Partnership, his book on the relationship between science and religion, again, in a very rhetorically beautiful passage, he says the following. He presents Judaism as, quote, the assertion of freedom as against its ever-present, ever-changing denials. We are free. We are choosing animals. Life is choice. In that fact lies our dignity. If we deny freedom in theory, eventually we will lose it in practice, as happened in Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia, and as may yet happen in new and unforeseeable ways, end quote. Transhumanism and AI technology it venerates are one of the threats to human freedom. We see it in many domains of our contemporary life, but especially in economics and politics, where surveillance capitalism is closely linked to the rise of authoritarianism. AI, I argue, has not delivered us happiness, but has rather exacerbated social problems, including addictiveness, deceptiveness, shallowness, loneliness, lack of empathy, viciousness, misogyny, racism, hate speech, and many other social ills. There's huge literature about each item that I just mentioned. This is not to say that we can revert to an earlier way of life prior to the invention of AI, but that we need to develop responsible AI and promote the design and engineering approaches that ensure the safe, beneficial, and fair use of AI technology. To do so, AI innovations should not be left to engineers and computer scientists, but involve humanists, be they ethicists, philosophers, anthropologists, scholars of religious studies, and specialists in cultural studies, who could introduce a human-centered approach to AI technology. Such an approach is indeed conservative, since it is urging us to try to use precedent, past wisdom, and conventional metaphysics as much as possible when trying to resolve ethical issues involving current and near-future AI technologies. But the more we enlist human-centered approach, the more likely we are to build responsible AI. In sum, we do live in a new, but not necessarily brave world, in which many functions of our life are governed by new technologies. The product of the Industrial Revolution that has unwittingly given us the ecological crisis we currently experience, and that has transformed our moral situation, as Jonas understood. Technology, therefore, cannot be a minor concern of Jewish philosophy. It must engage Jewish philosophers, especially the younger generation, whose life will be even more impacted by those challenges, both the technological challenge and the environmental challenge. As a critical enterprise, Jewish philosophy enables us to engage contemporary ideologies that venerate technology, especially AI technology, and identify their limitations and inconsistencies. Beyond the critical task, Jewish philosophy, as illustrated by the reference to Sachs, Levinas, and Jonas, also offers us alternative vision of human social existence that protects human dignity against the mechanization and the commodification of human life promoted by transhumanism and put into practice by greedy tech entrepreneurs. I guess that point also supports the way that Lori Zolos critiqued the extraction industry. The Jewish ethics of responsibility and its insistence on human dignity supports a democratic society that rejects the authoritarianism of technological humanism. Let's make the promise and the peril of technology central to contemporary Jewish philosophy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just in order to move with dispatch to Moise, I know we were going to have question answered. Do we have we have time for perhaps like one question to Hava before we move along? In the back, please.
Okay. Yes, the question is, I guess, somewhat simple. Okay. So what is it about the biological body or our history that enables us to have, let's say, freedom, it's a significant role between us and even future AI, that cannot be implemented in AI? I mean, our bodies, at least, are physical things. Right? We could construct something, presumably a physical thing. What is it about us that enables freedom, or is it something about our producing this thing that disables freedom? And what's the metaphysical story?
So the metaphysical story, I don't know where you
Well, yeah. Why don't you, Morris, just locking the same. So please, if you wouldn't mind just coming back up here for a moment or two, and then present Moise. Thank you.
It's a lovely question, but here's my response. My enemy, to use Laura's language, my enemy is a transhumanist narrative. I really think that the way they think about it is very dangerous. Now, the danger is not going to be recognized right now. Right now, we can all coexist somehow. So we do coexist with AI systems. But the question is, where does it all lead? I started by saying that transhumanism is a utopian narrative. So in that utopian narrative, there is no room for me and you and everybody else in this room. So that's what I think needs to be exposed, and what's really at stake here. What's really at stake here, that, show us the book. Where is the superintelligence books? Okay, have you read it? I don't know if you read this. Okay, so you read the book. So, and I met Nick Bostrom, I know him personally. So if you meet Nick Bostrom, he's a very nice chap, right? He only thinks about how can we imagine a situation in which all risks, for example, will be taken care of. But that's not true. There's no way to figure out all the risks. He thinks that there is, and he gives you kind of an impression that that's doable, but it's not doable. So my task is to expose what he's really about, and what I think they're really about is a kind of what I call collective suicide. That's really what's at stake. There will be no humans. So you can say, okay, these are just fantasies. These are just speculations. But I'm saying these speculations have have a price, and we are paying the price right now. So that's the reason for my critique. In the present, you're right. We're all historical beings. We're all embedded beings. Nick Boston looks like you and me. No real difference right now. But what will happen in the future? That's what's at stake. We're talking about the future, not the present.